Welcome back, everyone. This is Betska, the Guru Coach, and Raj, co-host out of Delhi, India. I'm from Vancouver Island, and welcome to Mindful Leadership Beyond Borders podcast. And we have an esteemed guest here today, Esther Charlie. And Raj has a question for us. Go ahead, Raj. What's your question?
My question is very different, both of you. I'm really curious for what kind of colonialism. So I need insight from both of for this point of view, both of side. So Esther, please.
Well, it's a very deep. I'll start, and then Esther may have to correct me here. But the what I understand colonialism to be is that, I mean, we're talking a long time ago, 1 or 2 centuries ago, when the Canadian government and the churches gathered together to essentially wipe out the Indian nation. That's in essence what they were doing. So they took all these children, put them into so-called religious schools where they could no longer wear their Indigenous clothing. They could not speak their Indigenous languages, nor have the culture, the food, everything that was near and dear to them was taken away. And some of these children were sexually abused and other physical ailments. And today, the Indigenous people are digging up graves of children that disappeared for one reason or another. And it's a very good thing, because then at least the families can grieve and have some closure to these children who were so badly abused. And then Esther was talking about how what happened there was these children who were suppressed. The governments and religions were trying to turn them into white people. So they wouldn't have power, because the Indigenous roots are very powerful. We're talking about powerful people, very loving, kind, compassionate, sweet people. But they were locked into these Indigenous residential schools to take. Let me put it this way. They wanted to take their spirit away from them.
And they did.
Yeah. And they did.
For many of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
For many of us.
Yeah.
And thank you, Raj, for that question. And I think it's one that I still am learning to understand and get a broader perspective, and know that it happened even before they came to Canada. It was happening over in Europe with the Catholics and the British and all that. And I shared earlier, I'm not an expert at history. There's certain areas I will not touch because it's too close to my heart. But it started over there. And they came here, and with the intention of finding land, and they landed in Canada when they thought they were going to be actually in India. That's what they were looking for originally.
Yeah.
So when they got here, that's how they called us Indians, right?
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that.
Something along that line. Like I said, I'm not an expert, but they were looking for someplace else and landed here in Canada.
Right.
And I thank you, Betska, for acknowledging, the strength and integrity of Indigenous people, because we were very welcoming when they landed. We opened our hands, we opened our hearts, we showed them how to live on the land. And then they got greedy. They wanted more. They wanted it all. And this is how they started to look at, and Betska talked about what the government had originally said, and they were going to wipe out the Indian problem.
Yeah.
Right? So then we get to reserves, You know, I was sharing earlier that, you know, it got to a place that not only with them coming in and taking over, they brought disease and wiped out many nations, almost 100% for some, with smallpox and disease and such. And then, you know, they started killing our people if they were not submitting and going along with. And, you know, it got to a point where our people were not strong enough to stand up against because there was not the numbers that they once had. So they submitted too in their moment of weakness. And we ended up on small reserves. That's how the reserves became. Whereas many Indigenous people traveled huge miles for hunting and gathering. They would move with the seasons to gather the food that they need. They would trade with each other. It doesn't mean we didn't have war amongst each other. Of course we did, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that with colonialism and just like you said around, they wanted to take the Indian out. They wanted them to become nice little colonial beings, right? That spoke English, that worshiped God. And if you look at everything that happened in residential school and the harm that was caused, some of our people follow organized religion today. Other people absolutely have huge hate for any organized religion, for any priests, any nuns. And if you look at history and the apologies that have come or not, that is not that has helped some of our people, not all.
Yes, even the Pope apologized a couple years ago when we had an Indigenous group go to Rome, and he apologized somewhat. I'm not sure I felt it from his heart, but that's another story. So, Raj, just so you know, these reserves, I've been on several, and they're just tiny parcels of land, and the government pushed them onto that land, and they had to stay there basically. So they didn't have the freedom to live their lives like they wanted to. So you know what, Raj? In many cases, this was like putting them in prison. You know, the spirit is being suppressed. Now, I know, having watched the situation for many years, that maybe in the last, I don't know, 15 years or so, we have found that the Indigenous people are gathering great strength. Many of them are highly educated. They're lawyers, teachers, professors, doctors, whatever. And from that education, they're becoming more and more powerful, and they are creating opportunities for the Indigenous people to live a better life. So, Esther, tell us, that's your passion. What opportunities can we create to help the Indigenous people live a better life? How would you describe that?
Well, I think for one, and again, I'll raise my hands to both of you and all of those allies, because there's allies in the world that are supporting Indigenous people, that understand the history, the impacts that our people have, and what we're going through today. I mentioned earlier that our percentages of children in care, incarceration, suicide, all of that. Sadly, Indigenous people are at the top of those lists.
Yeah.
So when I think about, okay, what can we do differently in the world, is to, I want to say, slow down and be mindful and be present. I've become friends or have a new understanding of stop and smell the roses.
Yeah.
Right? You know,
Yeah.
that's about being present.
Yes,
Right
it is.
now,
Yeah.
in this moment, I'm here with you, Raj. I'm here with you, Betska. In this moment, this is about being present. right?
Yeah.
I get this moment to reflect and think and consider what my words are going to be, right? I want to be mindful of what you're asking, what your curiosities are. So that's a part of being present.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I hold space in a respectful way, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I show up? And if we look at the world, each of us, and in work environments that are very colonial, the 9 to 5, the grind, you got to push to meet those stats, you got to get that report in on time. And if you need a break, you might get it.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's about educating ourselves, becoming mindful, knowing that Indigenous people, we're not all the same. I happen to be here and have a voice, but there may be another woman that is beside me that hasn't found her voice yet, that hasn't done her
Okay.
healing, that has
Okay.
not spoke her truth,
Mm-hmm.
that does not trust anybody. And if you're, got white skin and blue eyes and they have been harmed by, they are not going to like you. And that's
No.
not about you. It's about their
Mm-hmm.
harm or their
Right.
unhealed trauma, right?
Mm-hmm. For
So
sure.
that
Yeah.
how we show up, I think, is so important.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a pause, and when we come back, I would love for you to give us more details about. You and I know there's continuous racism happening here. So, with the blessings of the Creator, uh, what what specific safe spaces can we create for your people? What can we do together? So we'll come back in part 3 to dig into that detail. Yeah. So stay tuned, folks.
Thank you.